The flight attendant's face froze when Terrence Wright ordered the captain off his own plane. Passengers gasped as the airline CEO who denied Terrence's first-class seat minutes earlier appeared, ashen-faced. "Sir, this aircraft belongs to Skyline Airways," the attendant stammered. Terrence smiled coldly. "Not anymore. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice served at 30,000 feet, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination in action, and subscribe to catch more stories of people standing up against injustice. Now let's rewind to see how a routine business trip turned into a moment that would change an entire industry forever. Terrence Wright was not a man who attracted attention when he entered a room, unless you knew who he was. At 45, the founder and CEO of Wright Innovations stood 5'11" with a trim athletic build maintained through pre-dawn workouts. His close-cropped hair showed touches of silver at the temples, and behind his wire-rimmed glasses, his dark eyes missed nothing. Today, dressed in his standard travel uniform, premium dark jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and minimal jewelry save for his late mother's wedding band, he looked nothing like what most people expected a billionaire to look like, and that was exactly how Terrence preferred it. Growing up in South Chicago, Terrence had learned early that drawing attention often meant inviting trouble. His mother, Darlene Wright, raised him alone after his father was killed in a convenience store robbery when Terrence was just 3 years old. She worked 3 jobs: hospital janitor by day, waitress in the evenings, and weekend shifts at a laundromat to keep their small apartment and put food on the table. "Education is your ticket out," she'd tell him, her eyes tired but determined as she checked his homework after returning from a 12-hour shift. "They can take your money, your home, even your dignity, but no one can ever take what's in here." She'd tap his forehead gently. "Fill it with everything you can." Terrence took those words to heart. By 8, he was disassembling and reassembling electronics around their apartment. By 12, he'd built his first computer from discarded parts. His teachers noticed his extraordinary aptitude for mathematics and engineering, but opportunities remained frustratingly limited. "We don't have funding for that advanced program," his high school counselor had explained with a shrug when Terrence asked about the specialized science track that several white students had been placed into. "Besides, those courses are very challenging. Perhaps something more practical would suit you better." The memory still burned, even 30 years later. Terrence had gone home that day and told his mother what happened. "Apply anyway," she'd said firmly. "And when they say, they'll apply again and again, until they get tired of seeing your face." He did exactly that. 7 applications over 3 months until the school relented. Terrence graduated top of his class with SAT scores that broke school records. Yet college recruiters who flocked to meet his white classmates with lesser achievements somehow never found time to speak with him. Again, persistence paid off. After 23 scholarship applications, MIT finally offered him a full ride. But even there, amid the brightest minds in the country, Terrence encountered constant reminders that some people believed he didn't belong. "Did you get in through that special diversity program?" a classmate had asked casually during freshman orientation, as though the question wasn't laced with assumption and prejudice. "Are you sure you're in the right class?" professors would ask when he showed up to advanced seminars. "Perhaps you misunderstood the assignment," was the common refrain when his unconventional but correct solutions challenged their expectations. Through it all, Terrence kept his mother's words close. He graduated summa cum laude, turned down job offers from major tech firms, and set out to build something of his own. Wright Innovations began in his studio apartment with nothing but a laptop and an idea: revolutionizing aviation systems with AI that could predict maintenance needs before failures occurred. Getting funding proved nearly impossible. Bank after bank rejected his loan applications despite his impeccable business plan. 17 rejections in total, while he watched white entrepreneurs with half-baked ideas and mediocre credentials walk away with checks. "Your idea is interesting," one venture capitalist had told him, "but we're not sure you have the experience to execute it." The same VC funded a white Stanford dropout the following week. Eventually, A small black-owned investment firm took a chance on Terrence. 10 years later, Wright Innovations was valued at $6 billion, with contracts with major airlines worldwide. The company had expanded beyond predictive maintenance into comprehensive aviation systems, making flying safer and more efficient across the globe. Throughout his rise, Terrence developed a reputation for two things: absolute fairness in how he ran his company, and an elephant's memory for those who had wronged him. Wright Innovations became known for its strictly meritocratic hiring practices and diverse workforce, but competitors who had dismissed, copied, or undermined Terrence in the early days invariably found themselves outmaneuvered and obsolete. "I don't believe in revenge," he often told his executive team. "I believe in consequences." Today's flight was routine for Terrence. He'd flown Skyline Airways first class over 200 times for business trips across the country. The airline's routes aligned perfectly with Wright Innovations' client locations, and despite occasional service issues, he remained a loyal Platinum member. This particular trip was taking him to a crucial meeting to finalize the acquisition of a struggling regional airline. The company had solid infrastructure but poor management, exactly the kind of opportunity Terrence specialized in transforming. His team had spent months on due diligence, and today's meeting would determine whether they moved forward with the purchase. As his driver pulled up to the airport terminal, Terrence reviewed the final acquisition numbers on his tablet. The regional airline wasn't the only struggling aviation company on his radar. Skyline Airways itself had been showing signs of financial trouble. Customer complaints were up 60%, and their stock had dropped 15 points in the last quarter alone. "We could consider them as a potential acquisition target in the future," his CFO had suggested during yesterday's briefing. "Their domestic routes would complement our international expansion plans." Terrence had dismissed the idea. "Their corporate culture doesn't align with ours. The reports I've seen suggest systemic issues that would require too much overhaul." Now, walking into the terminal, Terrence noticed the strange looks from airport staff despite the Platinum tags on his carry-on. He'd grown accustomed to the double takes and suspicious glances throughout his career. Sometimes he played a mental game, counting how many security personnel would randomly select him for additional screening, or how many salespeople would ignore him in high-end stores until he pulled out his black card. Today, he wasn't in the mood for counting. He had a meeting to prepare for and a company to potentially purchase. Terrence approached the priority check-in line, Platinum member, card in hand, unaware that his day and the future of Skyline Airways was about to change dramatically. The first-class check-in counter at Skyline Airways featured plush blue carpeting, leather-upholstered chairs for waiting passengers, and a marble counter where two attendants served the airline's most valued customers. As Terrence approached, he noticed 3 white passengers being processed efficiently, their interactions with the staff warm and personable. "Good morning, Mr. Davidson. Traveling to Chicago today? Your usual scotch will be waiting when you board." "Mrs. Hamilton, lovely to see you again. I've arranged for extra pillows in your suite." When the counter cleared, Terrence stepped forward with his ID and Platinum member card already in hand. A habit born from years of preemptive defense against questioning. The attendant, a blonde woman in her 50s whose name tag read Beverly Winters, looked up from her computer. Her professional smile faltered slightly as she took in his casual attire. "Economy check-in is in the next terminal, sir," she said, not reaching for his documents. "I'm flying first class," Terrence replied evenly. "Platinum member." He placed his credentials on the counter. Beverly's eyebrows rose slightly. She picked up his ID and Platinum card, examining them with unusual scrutiny, turning the card over several times as though searching for signs of forgery. "There seems to be a system error with your booking," she said after typing something into her computer. "It's showing you in first class, but that section is fully booked today." Terrence remained calm. "I confirmed my seat yesterday. 2A, window, first class." Beverly's lips thinned. "I'll need to verify this. One moment." As she picked up her phone, Terrence glanced behind him. A white man in sweatpants and a rumpled t-shirt approached the counter beside them and was immediately greeted with a warm smile from the other attendant. "Mr. Collins, upgrading you to first class today as a thank you for your business. Will you be wanting champagne or orange juice? Before takeoff?" Beverly spoke in hushed tones on the phone, her eyes occasionally flicking toward Terrence. Yes, he's insisting. No, platinum card, but the system might be. Yes, please. She hung up and forced a tight smile. My supervisor will be here shortly to assist with this situation. 3 minutes later, Richard Klein arrived. The balding, middle-aged supervisor had the perpetually harried look of someone who considered customer service an inconvenience rather than his job description. What seems to be the problem? He asked Beverly, not acknowledging Terrence directly. This gentleman, Beverly emphasized the word strangely, is claiming a first-class reservation that's not properly reflected in our system. Richard finally turned to Terrence. Your name, sir? Terrence Wright, he replied, pointing to his ID still in Beverly's hand. Platinum member for 8 years, confirmed seat 2A yesterday. Richard took the ID, studying it with the same unwarranted suspicion Beverly had shown. And you're certain you purchased a first-class ticket? These are quite expensive. The implication hung in the air, clear as a slap. Terrence felt a familiar heat rising in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. I'm aware of the cost. I've flown first class on Skyline over 200 times. Richard typed rapidly into the computer terminal, frowning. Our system shows some discrepancy. Perhaps you were auto-upgraded due to your status, but those are always subject to availability and verification. There's no discrepancy, Terrence stated firmly. I purchased and confirmed a first-class seat as I always do. A line was forming behind him now. Richard glanced at the growing queue, then sighed dramatically. I'll allow the check-in, but I'll need to flag this for our security team to review. There have been incidents of membership fraud recently. He handed back Terrence's ID and platinum card along with a boarding pass, then added in a lowered voice. In the future, sir, if you're unsure about your booking class, please use the automated kiosks to avoid confusion. Terrence accepted his documents without comment. Engaging further would only delay him, and he had a meeting to prepare for. As he walked away, he heard Richard greet the next customer with considerably more warmth. Good morning, Ms. Whitfield. How was your vacation in Barbados? At the security checkpoint, Terrence joined the priority lane designated for first-class passengers and elite status members. He placed his laptop, carry-on and shoes in the bins as required, then waited to walk through the metal detector. Random. Security check, sir, announced a TSA agent, a stocky man whose name tag identified him as James Peterson. Please step over here. Terrence complied without protest, familiar with the drill. As he stood with arms outstretched for the manual screening, he watched as 3 white executives breezed through the metal detector without additional scrutiny. Is there something in particular you're looking for? Terrence asked calmly, as Peterson patted him down with unnecessary thoroughness. Just doing my job, sir, Peterson replied. Can't be too careful these days. The agent then proceeded to open Terrence's carry-on, removing each item individually and examining it. His laptop was swabbed twice for explosive residue. His toiletry bag was completely unpacked, each item opened and inspected. Is this really necessary? Terrence asked as Peterson unscrewed the cap on his cologne. Protocol, sir. Won't take but a minute if you cooperate. A black woman in line behind Terrence caught his eye and gave him a small nod of recognition and sympathy. Moments later, she too was pulled aside for random screening. 15 minutes later, Terrence was finally cleared. He repacked his meticulously searched belongings and proceeded toward his gate. Along the way, he noticed James Peterson chatting amicably with a white traveler, their security check consisting of nothing more than a cursory wave of the handheld detector. By the time Terrence reached gate A17, first-class boarding had just begun. He approached the gate agent, a young woman with a severe bun whose name tag read Nancy Fuller. Boarding pass and ID, please, she requested. Terrence provided both. Nancy frowned as she scanned his boarding pass. I'm sorry, there seems to be an issue with your boarding assignment. Could you step aside while I verify this? What sort of issue? Terrence asked, his patience beginning to wear thin. Your boarding pass is showing first class, but there's a flag on your reservation, Nancy explained, not quite meeting his eyes. I need to make sure you're in the correct boarding group. Her voice carried, causing several nearby passengers to turn and look. A couple of them exchanged glances clearly, assuming he was trying to board early or upgrade improperly. "My reservation is for first class, seat 2A, Terrence stated firmly. "I've already been checked in and cleared security with this boarding pass." "I understand, sir, but I need to follow protocol when there's a flag. Please step aside while I contact my supervisor." As Terrence moved to the side of the boarding area, he noticed a tall, distinguished-looking white man in an expensive suit, observing the interaction with interest. The man wore a Skyline Airways executive pin on his lapel, and several staff members nodded deferentially as they passed him. Nancy spoke quietly into her phone, occasionally glancing up at Terrence. After several minutes, she approached the executive and whispered something to him. The man looked directly at Terrence, assessing him with cool detachment before nodding to Nancy and proceeding to board the plane first. 5 more minutes passed. The remainder of first class had boarded, followed by business class. Still, Terrence waited as economy passengers began lining up. Finally, Nancy approached him again. "Mr. Wright, I've confirmed with my supervisor that you can board, but we'll need to verify your seat assignment once you're on the plane. The system is showing some inconsistency." "What inconsistency?" Terrence pressed. Nancy's smile was tight. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details. If you'd like to board now, you may, or you can wait to speak with the gate manager about your concerns." With the final boarding call announced, Terrence had little choice. He took his boarding pass and proceeded down the jetway, the weight of stares from other passengers heavy on his back. As he stepped onto the plane, he caught sight of the executive who had boarded earlier, now comfortably settled in first class, being served a pre-flight glass of champagne. The man glanced up, met Terrence's eyes briefly, then deliberately looked away. Terrence had encountered many forms of discrimination throughout his life and career. Sometimes it was blatant, sometimes subtle. This, he recognized, was something more systematic, a coordinated effort to make him question his own legitimacy as a first-class passenger, despite all evidence to the contrary. What he couldn't know then was that this wasn't just another, frustrating incident to endure. It was about to become a turning point that would reshape an entire industry. The narrow jetway connecting terminal to aircraft always felt like a liminal space to Terrence, that in-between moment where you're neither here nor there. Today, that transitional tunnel stretched longer than usual as he approached the aircraft, door boarding pass firmly in hand. A flight attendant greeted passengers at the entrance, her practiced smile flickering slightly as Terrence presented his first-class boarding pass. "Good morning, sir," she said, her name tag identifying her as Melissa Clark. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect regulation bun, not a strand out of place. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Terrence handed it over, watching as she scrutinized it with unusual intensity. "Is there a problem?" he asked, keeping his voice level. Melissa's smile tightened. "I just need to verify something. One moment, please." She stepped aside to consult with another flight attendant, speaking in hushed tones while occasionally glancing back at Terrence. Meanwhile, other passengers began to back up in the jetway behind him. Have you ever been made to feel like you don't belong somewhere you have every right to be? Comment 1 if you've experienced that sick feeling in your stomach when someone questions your presence in a space that should be open to everyone. Like this video if you believe no one should face discrimination based on appearance, and subscribe to see what happens next in this incredible true story. But seriously, what would you do if you were in Terrence's position right now? Would you cause a scene, or stay calm and collected? "I'm sorry for the wait, Mr. Wright," Melissa finally said. Returning with his boarding pass, "There seems to be a seating assignment issue. Please proceed to the aircraft and we'll sort it out once everyone's boarded." Terrence entered the plane, turning left toward first class instead of right toward economy. Immediately, he felt Melissa's hand on his arm. "Sir, as I mentioned, there's a seating issue. If you could continue to the main cabin for now, we'll address it shortly." "My assigned seat is 2A, Terrence responded firmly, pointing to the boarding pass she'd just returned to him. "First class, window seat." Melissa's professional veneer slipped for just a moment, revealing irritation beneath. "Yes, I understand what your boarding pass says, but there's been a reassignment. If you'll continue to the main cabin, I promise we'll sort this out." Terrence remained where he stood, aware that he was creating a bottleneck in the narrow aisle, but unwilling to relinquish his rightfully purchased seat without explanation. Behind him, passengers were beginning to murmur impatiently. "I'd like to speak to the captain," Terrence said calmly. "The captain is preparing for departure and cannot be disturbed," Melissa replied automatically. "Now, if you'll please. I'm not moving until someone explains why my confirmed first-class seat has been reassigned without notice." The executive Terrence had noticed earlier was seated in 2B, right beside his assigned seat. The man studiously avoided eye contact, sipping his champagne and pretending to be absorbed in a newspaper. In seat 2A, Terrence's seat, sat a middle-aged white man in a golf shirt who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "Sir," Melissa lowered her voice to a harsh whisper, "you're delaying the flight. If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to call security." "Checking my valid boarding pass isn't being disruptive," Terrence countered. "I'd like to know why my seat was given away when I have a confirmed reservation." The man in seat 2A finally spoke up. "Look, I'm happy to move. They just told me to sit here, but my original assignment was in 4C. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Taylor," Melissa quickly interjected. "Your seat has been confirmed." "But it wasn't my seat to begin with," the man, apparently Mr. Taylor, insisted, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "If this gentleman has the boarding pass for 2A, I'm happy to take my original seat." The executive in 2B finally looked up from his newspaper. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone suggesting the only problem was Terrence himself. "No problem, Mr. Phillips," Melissa assured him. "Just a minor seating confusion we're resolving." So this was Howard Phillips. Terrence recognized the name. CEO of Skyline Airways for the past 5 years, with a reputation for cost-cutting and declining service standards. "It doesn't seem minor to me," Terrence said. "My confirmed first-class seat has been given to another passenger without explanation or notification." Phillips sighed dramatically, folding his newspaper. "Flight attendant, perhaps the captain should address this situation. We're already running behind schedule." "Of course, sir." Melissa pressed the intercom button. "Captain to the front cabin, please." Moments later, a tall man with silver hair and captain's stripes appeared from the cockpit. Captain David Wilson had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, taking in the scene. "This passenger is insisting on a first-class seat that's been reassigned," Melissa explained, subtly emphasizing insisting, as though Terrence was being unreasonable. "Sir," Captain Wilson addressed Terrence directly, "I understand your frustration, but seat assignments are ultimately at the discretion of the airline. If there's been a reassignment, I'm sure the crew has a valid reason." "What reason?" Terrence pressed. "I confirmed this seat yesterday. I checked in with a first-class boarding pass. No one mentioned any reassignment until I actually boarded the plane." Wilson's expression hardened slightly. "Sir, as captain, I have final authority on this aircraft. If you've been directed to sit in the main cabin, that's where you need to go. We can discuss compensation for the downgrade after we land." "I don't want compensation," Terrence replied. "I want the seat I paid for." "That's no longer an option," Wilson stated flatly. "Now you have 2 choices. Take the seat offered in economy or be escorted off this flight for failing to comply with crew instructions." Terrence noticed Phillips smirking slightly behind his champagne glass. The other first-class passengers watched the interaction with expressions ranging from discomfort to detached interest, but none spoke up. In that moment, Terrence made a calculation. He could continue to argue and likely be removed from the flight, missing his important meeting, or he could strategically retreat, document everything, and file a formal complaint later. But there was a third option, one that required phone service he'd lose once the cabin door closed. "Fine," he said, reaching for his phone. "I'll take the economy seat." "A wise decision," Captain Wilson nodded curtly. "Melissa will show you to your new seat." As Melissa led him toward the back of the plane, Terrence quickly sent a text message to his executive team. "Change of plans. Call Robert. Execute option Phoenix immediately. Confirmation required within 10 minutes. No phone use during boarding, sir, Melissa chided, pointing to his device. Terrence silently put his phone away, settling into the middle seat in economy. That would, unbeknownst to the Skyline Airways crew, be the most expensive seat they'd ever assigned. The middle seat in row 27 was a far cry from the spacious leather chair awaiting Terrence in first class. His knees pressed against the seat in front of him, and his elbows competed for territory with passengers on either side. To his left, a teenage boy with headphones nodded along to inaudible music. To his right, an elderly woman clutched her purse with white-knuckled intensity, occasionally casting nervous glances his way. Terrence took a deep breath and centered himself. In his decades of navigating corporate America as a black man, he'd learned to choose his battles carefully. Some slights you challenged immediately, others required strategic patience. This situation, he decided, fell into the latter category. He pulled out his tablet and opened the presentation for his upcoming meeting. The screen displayed financial data for Air Connect, the regional airline he planned to acquire. But his mind kept returning to the humiliation he'd just experienced, the dismissive gate agent, the condescending captain, Howard Phillips's smug expression as Terrence was banished to economy. Terrence's phone vibrated with an incoming text. It was from Robert Chen, his chief legal officer. Confirming receipt. Team assembled. Proceeding with Phoenix. Estimated completion, 8 minutes. Confirm. Terrence typed back quickly. Confirmed. A flight attendant passed by, noticing his phone. Sir, we're preparing for departure. All electronic devices need to be switched to airplane mode now. Of course, Terrence replied, complying with the request. He closed his eyes, envisioning what was happening in his company's offices right now. Operation Phoenix was a contingency plan developed months ago for potential hostile takeovers of distressed airlines. His team would be making urgent calls to major shareholders, offering premium prices for immediate stock purchases. Given Skyline's recent troubles, many investors would be eager to sell. 10 minutes passed. The aircraft remained at the gate, despite the announced departure time having come and gone. Terrence could hear whispered conversations among the flight attendants, their expressions growing increasingly confused. The intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Wilson. We're experiencing a slight delay due to some paperwork issues. We should be underway shortly. Flight attendants, please stand by for further instructions. Terrence allowed himself a small smile. Paperwork issues was certainly one way to put it. Another 5 minutes passed. The cabin door, which had been closed for departure, suddenly opened again. A woman in a sharp business suit entered, flanked by 2 airport security officers. She spoke briefly with Melissa, whose eyes widened before darting toward economy class, toward Terrence. The woman made her way down the aisle, stopping at row 27. Mr. Wright? She asked quietly. Yes, Terrence confirmed. I'm Amanda Johnson, Airport Operations Director. Would you please come with me? There's been a significant change in circumstances that requires your attention. Murmurs rippled through the cabin as Terrence stood and followed Amanda toward the front of the plane. As they approached first class, Howard Phillips rose from his seat. What's the meaning of this? He demanded. We're already behind schedule. Whatever this is can wait until after we land. Amanda leaned close to Phillips and whispered something in his ear. The color drained from his face. That's impossible, he hissed. The board wouldn't. It's already done, Mr. Phillips, Amanda replied calmly. If you'll follow me as well, please. At the front of the aircraft, a small group had assembled in the galley area. Among them was a distinguished-looking man in a tailored suit, whom Terrence recognized as Thomas Rodriguez, Skyline Airways, Regional Vice President. Mr. Wright, Rodriguez stepped forward, hand extended. I must apologize profusely for the unfortunate misunderstanding regarding your seating arrangement. If we had known. You should treat all your passengers with respect regardless of who you think they are, Terrence interrupted, not accepting the handshake. Rodriguez faltered. Yes, of course. You're absolutely right. This situation is completely unacceptable, and I assure you those responsible will be held accountable. I'd like to speak with the captain, Terrence said. Captain Wilson is preparing for departure. Rodriguez began. "The plane isn't going anywhere until I speak with him," Terrence stated firmly. Rodriguez hesitated, then nodded to one of the flight attendants. "Please ask Captain Wilson to join us." Moments later, Captain Wilson emerged from the cockpit, his expression a mix of confusion and irritation. "What's happening here? We need to prepare for departure." "Captain Wilson," Terrence addressed him directly, "I believe we have unfinished business regarding my seating assignment." Wilson's jaw tightened. "Sir, I've made my decision regarding that matter. As captain of this aircraft—" "You're no longer captain of this aircraft," Terrence interrupted. The statement hung in the air for a moment. Wilson blinked in confusion. "Excuse me?" "Allow me to introduce myself properly," Terrence continued. "I'm Terrence Wright, CEO of Wright Innovations. As of approximately 7 minutes ago, my company has acquired majority ownership of Skyline Airways through an emergency stock purchase approved by your board of directors." Wilson's face went slack with shock. "That's not possible." "I assure you it is," Terrence replied. "Which means this aircraft, along with every other plane in the Skyline fleet, now belongs to my company. And my first executive decision is that you will not be flying it today." Howard Phillips pushed forward. "This is outrageous. You can't just walk in and take over a major airline on a whim." "Actually, he can," came a new voice. A tall man in a sharp suit had boarded the plane, Jackson Williams, Terrence's lawyer. "The paperwork has been filed and approved. Wright Innovations now owns 53% of Skyline Airways shares, purchased at a premium of 30% above market value. The board voted to accept the offer 8 minutes ago." Williams handed copies of documents to Phillips and Rodriguez. "You'll find everything is in order. Mr. Wright is now effectively the owner of this airline and, by extension, this aircraft." Phillips stared at the papers in disbelief. "This is some kind of corporate raid. It won't stand up in court." "Feel free to challenge it," Williams replied coolly. "In the meantime, Mr. Wright has full authority to make operational decisions, including personnel changes." Terrence turned back to Captain Wilson. "As I was saying, you are relieved of duty on this flight. Please gather your belongings and exit the aircraft." Wilson's face flushed with anger. "You can't do this. There are regulations, protocols, all of which I'm intimately familiar with, given that my company provides safety systems to most major airlines," Terrence countered. "There's nothing in those regulations that prevents an airline owner from replacing flight crew before departure, particularly when there's reason to believe they've demonstrated poor judgment." Rodriguez stepped in, clearly trying to salvage the situation. "Perhaps we can discuss this privately, Mr. Wright. The passengers have already been inconvenienced enough," Terrence said. "Captain Wilson, Mr. Phillips, Nancy Fuller, and Melissa Clark are to leave this aircraft immediately. First Officer Jennifer Reyes will assume command of the flight." The named individuals stared in shock. Melissa, who had been hovering nearby, began to protest. "Sir, this is highly irregular. The flight crew can't just be replaced on a whim." "This isn't a whim," Terrence replied. "This is a consequence of systematic discrimination against a passenger, who, as it happens, now owns the airline you work for." He turned to address Amanda Johnson. "Ms. Johnson, could you please ensure these individuals are escorted from the aircraft? And I'd like to address the passengers regarding the delay." Amanda nodded, signaling to the security officers who had accompanied her. "Of course, Mr. Wright." As Captain Wilson, Howard Phillips, Nancy, and Melissa were led toward the exit, Terrence reached for the intercom handset. The remaining flight attendants watched in stunned silence as the new owner of their airline prepared to address the plane. The confrontation had been inevitable from the moment Terrence was denied his rightful seat. But what happened next would transform not just this flight, but the entire airline industry. As Captain Wilson, Howard Phillips, Nancy Fuller, and Melissa Clark were escorted off the plane, a stunned silence fell over the first-class cabin. Benjamin Taylor, the passenger who had been given Terrence's seat, looked mortified. The remaining flight attendants exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unsure of the protocol for when the airline's ownership changed mid-boarding. Terrence sat down in the first-class seat that had been denied to him just minutes earlier. He opened his tablet, and began reviewing documents while Amanda Johnson coordinated with airport operations to manage the sudden staff changes. First Officer Jennifer Reyes, now promoted to acting captain, returned to the cockpit to prepare for departure with the second officer. In economy class, passengers were buzzing with speculation. Most had witnessed Terrence being taken from his middle seat to the front of the plane, followed by the unexpected deplaning of the captain and several staff members. Rumors spread rapidly through the cabin. Did they just arrest the captain? I heard there was some kind of corporate takeover. The airline went bankrupt mid-flight. Thomas Rodriguez, still visibly shaken, approached Terrence. "Mr. Wright, perhaps I could assist with passenger communications. This situation is unprecedented." "I'll handle it," Terrence replied, not looking up from his tablet. "Please ensure the new flight crew has everything they need for a safe departure." Rodriguez nodded and retreated toward the cockpit. As Terrence reviewed the documents on his screen, his mind flashed back to the meeting he'd had just yesterday with his executive team and investment bankers. They had gathered in the sleek conference room of Wright Innovations headquarters to discuss potential acquisition targets. "Skyline Airways is showing serious vulnerability," Robert Chen had explained, pointing to a graph displaying the airline's declining stock price. "Customer satisfaction is at an all-time low. They've had 3 safety incidents in the past year, and their CEO, Howard Phillips, has alienated both staff and passengers with aggressive cost-cutting measures." Lillian Patel, Wright Innovations CFO, had added, "Their maintenance systems are outdated, which is why they've had so many delays." Ironically, they rejected our proposal for an upgraded predictive maintenance system last year, claiming it was unnecessarily advanced for their needs. "What about their routes and fleet?" Terrence had asked. "Excellent domestic coverage, particularly in underserved markets," James Foster, head of strategic planning, had replied. "Their fleet is aging but well maintained. With our systems implemented, they could see a 30% reduction in maintenance-related delays within 6 months." The team had discussed the pros and cons of adding an airline to their portfolio. Wright Innovations had traditionally focused on providing technology to airlines rather than operating them directly, but vertical integration had its advantages. "The board is split on this," Robert had admitted. "Half see it as a natural extension of our business model. The other half worry it's too far outside our core competency." Terrence had been leaning toward passing on the opportunity. "There are other acquisition targets that align more closely with our current operations. Let's table Skyline for now and focus on AirConnect for tomorrow's meeting." That had been the plan, until today's events forced a reevaluation. Now, sitting in the first-class seat that should have been his all along, Terrence received another text from his executive team. "Phoenix complete. 53% ownership secured. Board emergency session ratified acquisition. Legal documentation finalized. Congratulations on your new airline." A wry smile crossed Terrence's face. This wasn't how he'd planned to acquire an airline, but there was a certain poetic justice to it. He turned to Jackson Williams, who had taken the seat beside him. "Everything's in order?" "Completely legal and binding," Williams confirmed. "The board was surprisingly eager to approve the sale once they saw the premium we were offering. Several members apparently had concerns about Phillips's leadership for some time, but lacked the votes to remove him." "And the crew changes?" "As majority owner, you have full authority to make operational decisions, including staffing changes when safety or service quality is at risk," Williams assured him. "Given the documented discrimination you experienced, there's a clear case for removing the staff involved." Terrence nodded. "Prepare a press statement. Emphasize that this acquisition was accelerated due to serious concerns about Skyline's treatment of passengers. Note that we'll be implementing comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all staff." "Will do," Williams replied, making notes on his tablet. "And Phillips?" "He'll receive the standard executive termination package, as outlined in his contract," Terrence decided. "We're not vindictive, just corrective." The intercom crackled with an announcement from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Acting Captain Jennifer Reyes. We've completed our pre-flight checks and will be departing shortly. We apologize for the delay and thank you for your patience." Terrence pressed the call button, and a nervous flight attendant appeared immediately. Yes, Mr. Wright? I'd like to address the passengers before we depart, he said. Of course, sir. I'll bring you the intercom handset. Moments later, Terrence's voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Terrence Wright, CEO of Wright Innovations. I want to personally apologize for the delay in our departure today. As some of you may have noticed, there have been some unexpected changes to our flight crew. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Effective immediately, Wright Innovations has acquired majority ownership of Skyline Airways. Our first priority is ensuring that every passenger receives respectful, equitable treatment regardless of their appearance, background, or seating assignment. Murmurs spread throughout the cabin as passengers processed this surprising news. The staff changes you witnessed were necessary to uphold that commitment, Terrence continued. Captain Reyes and her crew have my complete confidence, and they will get you to your destination safely and comfortably. As a gesture of goodwill, all passengers on this flight will receive complimentary premium beverage service, and those in economy will have access to the premium entertainment package at no charge. He concluded with, "Thank you for flying with us today. Wright Innovations and the new Skyline Airways are committed to setting a higher standard for air travel, one where everyone is treated with dignity. We appreciate your understanding during this transition." As he handed the intercom back to the flight attendant, Terrence noticed Benjamin Taylor shifting uncomfortably in his nearby seat. "Mr. Wright," Taylor said hesitantly, "I want you to know I had no idea what was happening earlier. They just told me to sit in 2A even though my boarding pass said 4C. If I'd known they had taken your seat..." "It wasn't your fault, Mr. Taylor," Terrence assured him. "The system was the problem, not you. Still, I feel terrible about it. I should have spoken up more forcefully. The responsibility for addressing discrimination shouldn't fall solely on bystanders," Terrence said. "It's about changing the systems that enable it in the first place." Taylor nodded thoughtfully. "Well, for what it's worth, I think what you just did was remarkable. Turning discrimination into ownership, that's a power move for the history books." Terrence smiled. "Sometimes justice requires more than complaints and lawsuits. Sometimes it requires changing who holds the power." As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, Terrence returned to his tablet to email his team about postponing the AirConnect acquisition meeting. They had a more pressing integration to manage now. What had begun as a routine business trip had transformed into something far more significant. Not just the acquisition of an airline, but the beginning of a transformation in how the industry approached equity and inclusion. And it had all started with a denied first-class seat. The Airbus A320 remained at the gate, despite having completed its pushback procedure. Through the window, Terrence could see ground crews reconnecting the jetway to the aircraft door. Something was happening. Something beyond the crew changes he had initiated. The cabin buzzed with speculation. Passengers who had witnessed the earlier confrontation were now furiously typing on their phones, undoubtedly sharing the dramatic events on social media. Several had recorded portions of Terrence's announcement, and Soccer's Skyline takeover was likely trending already. A gentle chime preceded another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the continued delay. We'll be holding at the gate for a few more minutes while we complete some administrative procedures. We expect to be underway shortly." Terrence checked his watch. The delay was approaching 45 minutes, enough to impact connecting flights for many passengers. He made a mental note to ensure accommodations for anyone affected. The aircraft door reopened, and Amanda Johnson reappeared. This time, she was accompanied by several individuals in business attire who Terrence recognized as Skyline Airways executives. Their expressions ranged from anxious to outright terrified. Amanda approached Terrence's seat. "Mr. Wright, I apologize for the further interruption. Several members of the Skyline executive team have requested an urgent meeting with you before departure. Would you be willing to step off the aircraft briefly?" Terrence considered the request. "No. If they wish to speak with me, they can do so here. I've already delayed these passengers enough." Have you ever witnessed someone completely change the power dynamic in a situation? Comment 1 if you believe Terrence is handling this situation perfectly, or comment 2 if you think he should be even more assertive with the airline executives. Like this video if you've ever wished you could turn the tables on someone who discriminated against you, and subscribe to see how this incredible confrontation resolves. Now, what do you think these executives are about to say to their new boss, who they just watched being discriminated against? Amanda nodded and gestured to the waiting executives. They filed into the first-class cabin, creating an impromptu boardroom at 30,000 feet. Leading the group was an older man with silver hair, whom Terrence recognized as Walter Simmons, chairman of Skyline's board. "Mr. Wright," Simmons began, his voice strained but professional. "On behalf of the board, I want to express our sincere apologies for the treatment you experienced today. It's completely unacceptable and does not reflect the values we aspire to uphold at Skyline Airways." Terrence regarded him coolly. "Aspire to uphold or actually uphold, Mr. Simmons? Because from my experience today, and from what I've observed in your company's declining customer satisfaction ratings, there seems to be a significant gap between aspiration and reality." Simmons winced. "You're absolutely right, and that's precisely why I'm here. The board voted unanimously to approve your acquisition offer not just because of the generous premium, but because many of us have been concerned about the company's direction under current leadership." Another executive stepped forward. Sophia Mendez, Chief Operations Officer. "Mr. Wright, we've been implementing cost-cutting measures that have compromised our service quality. Many of us have objected, but we were overruled. Your acquisition represents an opportunity to reset our priorities." "And yet," Terrence replied, "none of you intervened when discriminatory practices became part of those priorities. The treatment I received today wasn't an isolated incident. It was systematic, involving multiple staff members across different departments." The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We've had complaints," admitted Mendez, "but they were buried in customer service reports that never reached executive level." "Convenient," Terrence remarked. Walter Simmons cleared his throat. "Mr. Wright, we're prepared to fully support your leadership and vision for the company. The board has already drafted a statement announcing the acquisition and our commitment to a complete overhaul of our service standards and company culture." Terrence studied each face before him. Some showed genuine remorse. Others seemed merely concerned with saving their positions. He would need to evaluate each executive carefully in the coming weeks. "Here's what's going to happen," Terrence stated firmly. "This flight will depart with Acting Captain Reyes in command. Upon landing, I'll meet with the full executive team and board to outline immediate changes. Until then, I expect you to ensure that every passenger on every Skyline flight today receives exemplary service." The executives nodded eagerly. "One more thing," Terrence added. "I want a complete review of all customer complaints involving potential discrimination over the past 5 years. Not summaries, not statistics, the actual complaints. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." "Of course," Simmons agreed. "We'll have that compiled immediately." As the executives filed out, Benjamin Taylor leaned across the aisle. "That was impressive," he said quietly. "Most people in your position would have fired everyone on the spot." "Mass firings make headlines," Terrence replied. "Systematic change makes history." After the executives departed, Amanda Johnson remained. "Mr. Wright, there's one more matter. Several passengers have requested to speak with you, and the media has already gathered at our destination airport. Your acquisition is breaking news on all major networks." Terrence nodded. "Please thank the passengers for their interest, but I'll speak with them after we land. As for the media, have my PR team meet us at the arrival gate. They'll coordinate appropriate statements." As Amanda turned to leave, Terrence added, "And Ms. Johnson, thank you for handling this situation with professionalism. That quality seems to be in short supply at Skyline today." She smiled slightly. "I appreciate that, sir. For what it's worth, many of us have been frustrated by the direction the company has taken. There's a lot of talent here that's been suppressed under current management." "Noted," Terrence replied. "We'll be conducting a thorough evaluation of all departments. Talent and integrity will be recognized." After Amanda left, the new flight crew completed their preparations. The jetway was disconnected once more, and the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Terrence gazed out the window at the sprawling airport. His thoughts turned to his mother, who had passed away 5 years earlier. She had lived long enough to see her son become a successful entrepreneur, but not long enough to witness this moment, when he transformed a humiliating experience into an opportunity to create lasting change. "Education is your ticket out," she had always told him. What she couldn't have known was that her son would one day own the airline. The aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky. Below, the city grew smaller, its patterns of privilege and exclusion reduced to abstract geometry from altitude. But Terrence knew those patterns were real and deeply entrenched. Changing them would require more than just acquiring an airline. It would require reimagining what air travel could be when everyone was treated with equal dignity. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, Terrence opened his laptop and began drafting a new vision for Skyline Airways. By the time they landed, he would have the blueprint for an airline where what happened to him today would never happen to anyone else again. The flight that began with discrimination was now heading toward transformation, and Terrence Wright was just getting started. At 35,000 feet, the Airbus A320 reached its cruising altitude. The cabin settled into the familiar rhythm of a domestic flight, the gentle hum of engines, the soft ping of call buttons, the quiet conversations of passengers. But there was nothing routine about Flight 1382 today. Terrence sat in his rightful first-class seat, reviewing documents on his tablet. The acquisition had been executed with remarkable efficiency, thanks to his company's contingency planning and the eagerness of Skyline's board to accept his offer. What should have taken weeks had been compressed into minutes through the perfect alignment of opportunity, preparation, and necessity. Jennifer Reyes's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Weather conditions are clear, and we expect an on-time arrival. The seatbelt sign has been turned off, though we recommend keeping your seatbelts fastened while seated. Our flight attendants will begin service shortly." Terrence pressed his call button. A flight attendant, her name tag read Sofia Rodriguez, appeared immediately. "Yes, Mr. Wright? I'd like to address the passengers again, please." Sophia nodded and retrieved the intercom handset. Throughout the cabin, passengers fell silent as Terrence's voice filled the aircraft once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Terrence Wright again. I want to thank you for your patience during our delayed departure. As I mentioned earlier, Wright Innovations has acquired Skyline Airways, and we're implementing immediate changes to improve your experience." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What you witnessed today, the removal of certain staff members, was the result of discriminatory treatment that I experienced as a passenger. As a Black executive, I've encountered such treatment throughout my career, but today presented a unique opportunity to address it directly." Terrence continued, his voice steady and clear. "Effective immediately, I'm instituting new policies across the entire Skyline Airways organization. First, all staff will undergo comprehensive anti-bias training. Second, we're establishing an independent passenger advocacy office to investigate complaints of discrimination. Third, we're implementing blind application processes for all hiring to ensure diversity at every level of the company." Throughout the cabin, passengers listened intently. Some nodded in approval. Others seemed uncomfortable with the directness of his message, but all recognized they were witnessing something unprecedented. "I believe that change happens when those with power use it responsibly. Today's events weren't planned, but they represent an opportunity to transform not just one airline, but set a new standard for the entire industry." He concluded, "I appreciate your being part of this historic flight. Our crew will ensure you have an excellent journey, and each of you will receive follow-up communication about enhanced benefits as valued customers during this transition. Thank you." As Terrence handed back the intercom, spontaneous applause broke out in various sections of the plane. Not universal. Nothing involving race in America ever was, but substantial enough to suggest his message had resonated with many. Benjamin Taylor, still seated nearby, was among those applauding vigorously. "That was powerful," he said when the cabin quieted. "I've never heard anyone address discrimination so directly in a corporate context. Too often, these incidents are handled with vague apologies and promises to do better," Terrence replied. Real change requires specific actions and accountability. Taylor nodded thoughtfully. I'm a marketing executive and I've sat through countless diversity initiatives that felt like box-checking exercises. What you're describing sounds different. It will be, Terrence assured him. When the person signing the checks has personally experienced discrimination, the approach tends to be more authentic. Their conversation was interrupted by Jackson Williams, who leaned over from the row behind. Terrence, you should see this. He handed over his tablet, which displayed a social media feed. The hashtag #JusticeInTheSkies was trending nationally, with passengers from the flight sharing their accounts of what had transpired. One tweet read, "Witnessing history on the Mitre skyline. 382. Black executive denied seat. Returns as owner 10 min later. Removes discriminatory staff. Power move of the century. Justice in the skies." Another. CEO just announced new anti-discrimination policies mid-flight after taking over airline that discriminated against him. This is how change happens. Justice in the skies. The story was spreading faster than even Terrence had anticipated. Williams pointed to another screen showing messages from his executive team. Major news networks were requesting statements, and Skyline's stock, what remained in public hands, had plummeted while Right Innovations shares surged. We need to get ahead of the narrative, Williams advised. Your communications team has drafted a press release, but they need your approval on the framing. Terrence reviewed the draft, making several edits to emphasize that this wasn't about personal vindication but systemic change. Make sure we're clear. This isn't just about what happened to me today. It's about ensuring it doesn't happen to anyone else tomorrow. As the flight progressed, Terrence moved through the cabin, speaking with passengers in both first class and economy. He listened to their experiences with Skyline Airways and other airlines, gathering insights that would inform his transformation strategy. In economy, he found the elderly woman who had been seated beside him earlier. "I want to apologize for any disruption to your flight," he told her. She studied him for a moment before responding. "Young man, I'm 87 years old. I've seen this country change, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. What you did today, that's the better kind of change." She patted his hand. "My late husband would have loved to see this. He wasn't allowed to sit at lunch counters when he was young. Now here you are owning the whole restaurant, so to speak." Terrence thanked her and continued through the cabin. Near the rear of the plane, he encountered a young black flight attendant named Michael Jordan, who, as he quickly clarified with a smile, was not the basketball player. "Sir," Michael said quietly, "I've been with Skyline for 3 years, and what you experienced, it happens all the time. Not just to passengers, but to crew too. There's a reason you don't see many people who look like us in first class or in the cockpit." "That's going to change," Terrence promised. "I'd like you to be part of our new passenger advocacy team. We need people who understand the problem firsthand." Michael's eyes widened. "I'd be honored, sir." Returning to first class, Terrence found Benjamin Taylor engaged in conversation with another passenger about the day's events. "The thing is," Taylor was saying, "I never would have been given that seat if they hadn't taken it from Mr. Wright. I feel complicit even though I didn't know what was happening." "That's how systemic discrimination works," the other passenger replied. "Many benefit from it without realizing they're participating in it." Terrence rejoined the conversation. "Mr. Taylor, I meant what I said earlier. You weren't responsible for their decisions, but your discomfort with the situation. That awareness is valuable. I'd like to speak with you further after we land." As the flight began its descent, Terrence returned to his seat and reviewed the changes already in motion. His team had prepared documentation for the official takeover, including temporary management structures until permanent leadership could be established. Howard Phillips had been officially removed as CEO, with Terrence stepping in as interim chief executive while continuing to lead Right Innovations. The crew members who had discriminated against him, Captain Wilson, flight attendants Melissa Clark and Nancy Fuller, and gate agent Beverly Winters, had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. They would receive due process, but the evidence against them was substantial. Just before landing, Jennifer Reyes made her final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the entire crew, I want to thank you for flying with us today. We're beginning our descent into Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Local time is 2:15 p.m., and weather conditions are sunny with a temperature of 72 degrees. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts as we prepare for landing." She paused before adding, "It has been my honor to serve as your captain on this historic flight. On behalf of the new Skyline Airways, we look forward to welcoming you aboard again soon." As the aircraft touched down on the runway, Terrence felt a sense of completion. What had begun as a routine business trip had transformed into something far more significant. He had arrived at his destination not just as a passenger, but as an agent of change. The plane taxied to the gate, where Terrence could already see the gathered media through the windows. The story of Flight 1382 was about to reach a much wider audience, and the journey toward justice in the skies was just beginning. The arrival gate at Chicago O'Hare International Airport buzzed with unusual activity. Airport security personnel formed a corridor through the terminal, holding back reporters with press badges and curious onlookers who had gathered after news of the mid-air acquisition spread across social media. Camera flashes pulsed like strobe lights as passengers from Flight 1382 emerged from the jetway, many recording the scene on their phones. Suddenly part of a historic moment they hadn't anticipated when booking their tickets. Terrence was the last to deplane, preceded by his lawyer Jackson Williams and flanked by airport officials. The terminal erupted with questions from journalists as he appeared. "Mr. Wright, was this takeover planned before the discrimination incident? Do you intend to completely overhaul Skyline's management? How much did you pay for the airline?" Terrence raised a hand and the shouting subsided. The assembled media fell into an expectant hush. "I'll make a brief statement, but I won't be taking questions at this time," he began, his voice calm and measured. "Today's acquisition of Skyline Airways by Wright Innovations was accelerated by events that occurred during the boarding of Flight 1382. I experienced discriminatory treatment that, unfortunately, reflects experiences many travelers of color face daily across the airline industry." Camera shutters clicked rapidly as he continued. "This acquisition represents more than a business transaction. It's an opportunity to transform an airline's culture from within and set new standards for the industry. In the coming days, we'll announce comprehensive changes to ensure that every passenger receives equitable treatment regardless of their appearance or background." He concluded, "I'm now late for an important meeting, so I'll refer further questions to our communications team. Thank you." As Terrence moved through the terminal with his team, he spotted Benjamin Taylor waiting nearby. "Mr. Taylor," Terrence called, gesturing him over. "I meant what I said about speaking further. Are you available tomorrow morning?" "Absolutely," Taylor replied. "I've actually canceled my return flight. This situation has given me a lot to think about regarding my own company's practices." "Good." Terrence handed him a business card. "9 a.m. at Wright Innovations' Chicago office. I have a proposition for you." After Taylor departed, Terrence's driver escorted him to a waiting town car. Once inside, he finally had a moment to process the whirlwind of events. His phone had accumulated dozens of messages, including one from Robert Chen. Board meeting scheduled for 5 p.m. Media requests overwhelming. Social media response 87% positive. Air Connect acquisition postponed pending your instructions. Terrence responded. "Proceed with board meeting as scheduled. Prepare integration timeline for review. Hold on Air Connect for now." The car pulled away from the terminal, heading toward downtown Chicago where Wright Innovations maintained regional offices. Looking back at the airport, Terrence reflected on how a routine business trip had transformed into a watershed moment, not just for his career, but potentially for an entire industry. 6 hours later, Terrence stood before Skyline Airways' board of directors in an emergency session convened in a downtown hotel conference room. The atmosphere was tense but deferential. These were now people reporting to him rather than independent corporate governors. "Gentlemen, ladies," Terrence began, scanning the faces around the mahogany table. "Today's events were unprecedented, but they present an extraordinary opportunity. Skyline Airways has been struggling with declining customer satisfaction, safety, concerns, and financial underperformance. Wright Innovations has the technology and vision to reverse that trajectory. Walter Simmons, the board chairman, nodded earnestly. We're fully committed to supporting your leadership, Mr. Wright. The treatment you experienced today was inexcusable and, frankly, emblematic of broader issues within the company culture. Issues you were aware of but failed to address, Terrence noted. The room fell silent. But recrimination isn't productive. What matters now is the path forward. He activated a presentation on the room's display screen. This is my immediate action plan for Skyline Airways. First, a comprehensive audit of all customer complaints involving potential discrimination over the past 5 years. Second, mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, beginning with executive leadership. Third, an overhaul of hiring and promotion practices to ensure diversity at every level of the organization. The board members listened attentively, some taking notes, others watching with expressions ranging from genuine interest to barely concealed concern about their own positions. Additionally, Terrence continued, we'll be rebranding the airline within 6 months. Skyline Airways will become Horizon Air, reflecting our commitment to expanding possibilities for all travelers. He clicked to the next slide, which displayed organizational changes. Several board members shifted uncomfortably as they saw their positions marked for evaluation. I believe in second chances, Terrence assured them, but I also believe in accountability. Each of you will be evaluated, based on your past actions and commitment to our new direction. Some of you will remain with the company, others will transition elsewhere. After the presentation concluded, Terrence opened the floor for questions. Most were pragmatic, focused on integration timelines and operational challenges. But one, board member Charles Winthrop, raised a more pointed concern. Mr. Wright, Winthrop began, his tone carefully measured. While I fully support addressing any discriminatory practices, I worry that the theatrical nature of today's events might create perception issues. The market could view this as a personal vendetta rather than a strategic acquisition. Terrence considered the man for a moment. Mr. Winthrop, do you have children? Surprised by the question, Winthrop nodded. Yes, 2 daughters. If one of your daughters was denied service because of her gender, would addressing that discrimination be a vendetta? Or would it be justice? Winthrop had no response. The market, Terrence continued, will judge us by our results. 6 months from now, when Horizon Air is outperforming competitors in both customer satisfaction and profitability, today's theatrical events will be seen for what they truly were, a necessary correction to a broken system. The meeting adjourned 2 hours later with clear directives and deadlines. As the board members filed out, Terrence remained at the table with his executive team to discuss next steps. Meanwhile, across town, Howard Phillips was holding an impromptu press conference of his own outside Skyline's Chicago offices. This hostile takeover was executed under dubious circumstances, Phillips declared to a cluster of reporters. Mr. Wright exploited a minor customer service misunderstanding to justify a predatory acquisition that had clearly been planned for some time. When asked about the specific allegations of discrimination, Phillips bristled. Skyline Airways has always prided itself on treating all passengers equally. Any suggestion otherwise is simply being used to distract from the predatory nature of this takeover. But Phillips's narrative was already falling apart. Social media was flooded with accounts from current and former Skyline passengers sharing their own experiences of discrimination. Justice in the Skies had evolved into Dr. My Sky saga, with thousands of travelers recounting similar treatment across multiple airlines. By evening, the story had made national news broadcasts. Financial analysts were debating the implications for the airline industry. Civil rights leaders were praising the bold action, and business schools were already drafting case studies on the unprecedented acquisition. In his hotel suite that night, Terrence watched the coverage with mixed emotions. He hadn't sought this spotlight, but he recognized its potential value in driving meaningful change. His phone chimed with a message from an unexpected source, his former high school counselor. the one who had tried to discourage him from applying to the advanced science program 30 years earlier. "I saw you on the news. I was wrong back then. You've proven what's possible when barriers are removed instead of erected. Congratulations." Terrence set the phone down without responding. Some acknowledgments came too late to matter on a personal level, but they still indicated progress. In the broader culture, his thoughts turned to his mother, who had sacrificed so much to give him opportunities. She had taught him that education was his ticket out of poverty. What she couldn't have known was that it would eventually become his ticket to owning the means of transportation itself. As he prepared for bed, Terrence made one final call to Jennifer Reyes, the first officer who had stepped up as acting captain for Flight 1382. "Captain Reyes," he greeted her, "I wanted to personally thank you for your professionalism today, under extraordinary circumstances." "Just doing my job, sir," she replied modestly. "Though I admit it's not every day you get promoted to captain mid-boarding." "How would you feel about making that promotion permanent?" Terrence asked. "We're going to need strong leadership as we transform this airline." There was a moment of surprised silence before she responded. "I'd be honored, Mr. Wright." "Good, and I'd like your input on how we can increase representation in the cockpit. Less than 3% of commercial airline pilots are black, and even fewer are women. That needs to change." "I have some ideas about that," she said, her voice gaining enthusiasm. "There are structural barriers in pilot training programs that disproportionately impact minorities and women. Write them up and send them to me directly," Terrence instructed. "This is a priority." After ending the call, Terrence stood at his hotel window overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city lights mirrored the stars above, both representing possibilities and destinations. For too long, many of those possibilities had been artificially limited for people who looked like him. Today marked a turning point, not just for Terrence Wright or Skyline Airways, but potentially for an industry that had long struggled with issues of equity and inclusion. The denied first-class seat had become a catalyst for transformation that would extend far beyond a single flight or airline. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, integration plans, rebranding strategies, personnel decisions. But tonight, for the first time in his career, Terrence felt he had achieved something more significant than business success. He had created an opportunity for systemic change. And that, he reflected as the city twinkled below, was worth far more than a first-class seat. 6 months later, Terrence Wright stood in the gleaming new headquarters of Horizon Air, formerly Skyline Airways. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of aircraft taking off and landing, each bearing the company's new livery, a sleek gradient of blue and purple with a stylized horizon line that seemed to extend into infinite possibility. The rebranding had been more than cosmetic. In half a year, the airline had undergone a complete transformation from corporate culture to customer experience. Today marked the official relaunch, with media tours, employee celebrations, and the inaugural flight of Horizon Air's new premium service. "Mr. Wright?" called a voice behind him. Terrence turned to see Michael Jordan, the flight attendant he'd met on that fateful day 6 months ago. Michael now served as director of the Passenger Advocacy Office, a new department created specifically to address concerns of discrimination and ensure equitable treatment for all travelers. "The final numbers just came in," Michael reported, tablet in hand. "Customer satisfaction ratings are up 68%. Complaints of discriminatory treatment have decreased by 82%. And our employee diversity metrics show significant improvement across all departments." Terrence nodded, pleased but not surprised. "And the financial indicators?" "Exceeding projections," Michael confirmed. "Revenue is up 12% despite industry-wide challenges. Our stock has outperformed the market by 23 points since the rebrand announcement." "Good, but numbers only tell part of the story. What are you hearing from the front lines?" Michael's expression softened. "It's different now. You can feel it when you walk through the terminals, board the planes. There's a sense of belonging for everyone." Terrence placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "That's what matters most." They walked together toward the executive conference room where the day's events would begin. Along the way, They passed walls displaying the company's new core values in artistic renderings: equity, innovation, respect, opportunity. Howard Phillips called for an interview yesterday, Michael mentioned. He's still pushing the narrative that the acquisition was planned before the incident. Terrence smiled slightly. Let him. The truth is in our results, not his revisionist history. Phillips had struggled to find comparable employment after his removal as CEO. Several other executives who had been directly involved in the discrimination incident faced similar challenges. Beverly Winters, Richard Klein, Nancy Fuller, and Melissa Clark had all been terminated following thorough investigations that revealed patterns of biased behavior. Captain David Wilson, however, had taken a different path. After initially threatening legal action, he had eventually requested to undergo the company's anti-bias training program. His letter acknowledging his misconduct and requesting a second chance had been sincere enough that Terrence approved his reinstatement, not as a captain, but as a first officer under Jennifer Reyes's command. The symbolism of that reporting structure was not lost on anyone in the company. The conference room was already filled with executives, board members, and special guests when Terrence and Michael arrived. Among them was Benjamin Taylor, now Horizon Air's chief marketing officer. Their conversation the day after the incident had led to an unexpected partnership. Taylor had been looking for a more purpose-driven role, and Terrence had needed someone who understood both marketing and the importance of authentic inclusion. "Everyone's ready," Taylor announced as Terrence entered. "Media briefing first, then the employee address, followed by the inaugural flight ceremony." Terrence took his position at the head of the table as cameras prepared to roll. The press conference began with prepared remarks about the airline's transformation, followed by questions from journalists. "Mr. Wright," began a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, "6 months ago, you acquired this airline after experiencing discrimination as a passenger. Many viewed it as an emotional response rather than a strategic business decision. In retrospect, how do you assess that characterization?" "I reject the false dichotomy," Terrence replied. "Business decisions and human values aren't separate considerations. They're interconnected. Treating people with dignity isn't just morally right, it's good business. Our financial results prove that." A reporter from CNN followed up. "Horizon Air now has the most diverse executive team in the industry. Was that a deliberate strategy or a natural evolution?" "Both," Terrence answered. "We implemented blind application processes that remove identifying information from initial reviews. The result was that more diverse candidates advanced to final interviews based solely on their qualifications. What we discovered was that talent is universal, but opportunity had been limited." Another journalist raised her hand. "Your blind application process has become a model for other industries. Can you explain how it works?" "We use software that removes names, gender identifiers, age indicators, and even university names from applications during initial screening," Terrence explained. "Candidates are evaluated purely on skills, experience, and problem-solving abilities. Only after selections are made based on merit do interviewers see complete profiles. The results speak for themselves." After the press conference, Terrence moved to the main terminal where hundreds of Horizon Air employees had gathered for a company-wide address. The crowd represented the airline's new face, diverse in every dimension, from the pilots and flight attendants to ground crew and administrative staff. Standing at the podium, Terrence surveyed the assembled team. "6 months ago, I boarded a flight as a passenger and ended up becoming the owner of an airline." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "It wasn't the journey I expected, but it's led us all to an extraordinary destination," he continued. "When I was denied that first-class seat, I had 2 options: accept the injustice or challenge it. What made the difference was that I had the resources to challenge it effectively. Too many people face discrimination without such resources. That's why what we're doing here matters beyond our company. We're creating a blueprint for change that extends far beyond the airline industry." Terrence detailed the company's initiatives over the past 6 months: the comprehensive anti-bias training program, the scholarship fund for underrepresented youth interested in aviation careers, the industry-leading parental leave policy, and the transparent pay structure that had eliminated gender and racial wage gaps. But our most important achievement can't be measured in policies or programs, he emphasized. It's the culture we've built together, one where everyone belongs, everyone contributes, and everyone has the opportunity to excel. The crowd erupted in applause, none more enthusiastic than Amanda Johnson, who had been promoted to Chief Diversity Officer after her professionalism during the initial incident. Beside her stood Jennifer Reyes, now one of the few female black captains in commercial aviation and the head of Horizon's pilot recruitment initiative. After the address, Terrence made his way to Gate H8, where Horizon Air's inaugural premium service flight was preparing for departure. The new first-class cabin featured state-of-the-art amenities, but what truly distinguished it was the company's guarantee. Every passenger would receive the same respectful service, regardless of appearance, background, or how they were dressed. As passengers began boarding, Terrence noticed an elderly black man being escorted to the gate by a Horizon Air customer service representative. The man appeared disoriented, clutching his boarding pass nervously. "I don't think I'm in the right place," the man was saying. "I've never flown first class before." The customer service representative, a young white woman, responded with genuine warmth. "Mr. Williams, you're exactly where you belong. Your seat is 2A, and I'll personally ensure you're comfortable throughout the journey." Terrence watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction. This was the transformation in action, not just in policies or statistics, but in human interactions that affirmed dignity and belonging. As the boarding process continued, Terrence spotted Benjamin Taylor greeting passengers. The marketing executive had become one of the company's most passionate advocates, using his platform to speak candidly about his own journey from bystander to ally. "Ben," Terrence called, approaching his new CMO. "How's our first official Horizon flight looking?" "Full capacity, diverse passenger mix, and crew satisfaction off the charts," Taylor reported. "The documentary team is capturing everything for the company history archives." Terrence nodded, watching as more passengers boarded. "Any sign of our special guest?" "Just arrived," Taylor confirmed, gesturing toward the terminal entrance where Sofia Mendez, the former Skyline COO who had been retained as Horizon's chief strategy officer, was escorting an elegantly dressed woman in her 70s. Terrence moved to greet them. "Ms. Wright," he said, taking the woman's hands in his. "Thank you for joining us today." Darlene Wright, Terrence's mother's sister and his only remaining family, squeezed his hands affectionately. "Your mother would be so proud, Terrence. Not just of your success, but of how you've used it to make a difference." The mention of his mother brought a rare moment of public emotion for Terrence. "She's the reason I'm here," he said softly. "Everything I learned about dignity and perseverance came from her." As final boarding was announced, Terrence, his aunt, and the executive team took their seats in first class. The aircraft was Horizon Air's newest acquisition, a state-of-the-art Airbus equipped with Wright Innovations' proprietary safety systems. Captain Jennifer Reyes' voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Horizon Air Flight 1 from Chicago to New York. I'm Captain Jennifer Reyes, and on behalf of our entire crew, we're honored to have you with us on this historic inaugural flight." As the plane taxied toward the runway, Terrence gazed out the window at the airport where, 6 months earlier, he had been deemed unsuitable for a first-class seat based on his appearance. Now, he owned not just the seat, but the entire airline. The aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted into the clear blue sky. Below, Chicago receded into a patchwork of urban geometry. Ahead lay New York and the future of an industry transformed. Seated comfortably in 2A, the same seat designation he had been denied half a year ago, Terrence reflected on the journey. The incident that had sparked this transformation had been painful and humiliating. But the response had created something valuable and lasting. An airline where everyone was treated with equal dignity. A workplace where diversity was not just accommodated, but celebrated. And a blueprint for change that other companies were already beginning to follow. Sometimes justice required more than words or policies. Sometimes it required changing who held the power. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Terrence opened his laptop to review plans for Wright Innovations' next acquisition target, a technology company with promising innovations, but a troubling record on inclusion. Their board meeting was scheduled for next week. He smiled slightly as he imagined their surprise when he walked into the boardroom. They would soon learn what Skyline Airways had discovered. Underestimating Terrence Wright was always a costly mistake. This story teaches us that true power comes not just from wealth or position, but from how we use these resources to create lasting change. Terrence Wright could have simply filed a complaint or lawsuit after experiencing racism, but he recognized an opportunity to transform an entire system. He didn't just want compensation, he wanted correction. The lesson here is threefold. First, discrimination often persists because those with the authority to change it lack the personal experience to recognize its impact. Second, meaningful change requires more than policies. It requires shifting who makes decisions. And third, sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't anger, but strategic action that changes the power dynamic entirely. Terrence's approach reminds us that while we cannot control how others treat us, we can control our response. He channeled his humiliation into determination, not just to right a personal wrong, but to ensure nobody else would face similar treatment. His story demonstrates that the ultimate victory over discrimination isn't just surviving it, it's rebuilding the system that allowed it to flourish. Have you ever witnessed someone turn discrimination into opportunity? This true story shows how one moment of racism transformed an entire industry. Comment below with your thoughts on Terrence's approach to creating change. Was buying the airline that discriminated against him the ultimate power move, or would you have handled it differently? Like this video if you believe in standing up against discrimination, subscribe for more incredible true stories of justice and transformation, and share this with someone who needs to hear that sometimes. The best response to discrimination is success. Thank you for watching, and remember, your greatest power might come from the very moment someone tries to make you feel powerless.